Oh, hi there. Let me ask you a question. What do you think makes a good image? It doesn't matter if it's a photo or video, but yeah, what do you think makes a good image? Is it a good camera or an expensive lens? Well, if your thought is either, it's actually quite simple. It's light. Okay, now that everything else is set up already, let's continue. So if light does not exist, it doesn't matter how fancy your camera is because all they'll be seeing is basically darkness. Think about it. We live in an age where honestly our equipment is fantastic. We have cameras that can practically see in the dark, but that still requires some level of light for the camera to capture. But even without the fancy equipment that is pretty accessible to everyone these days, photographers from decades ago have already been making great images. And that's because they understand that the fundamentals towards making a good image lies in capturing light that makes a scene come alive. Okay, so I think we've established that good lighting makes a good image. So what do professional creatives do when it comes to an environment with bad lighting? Well, like you saw what I did just now, we add our own lights. Take indoor events for example. I'm sure that any good photographer worth their salt would at least have a flash with them. And that's because indoor lighting isn't always designed with photography in mind. Sure, it may look fine to the naked eye, and as an overall scene, it would look pretty nice. But when you are capturing people in these environments, you can't control the placement of these humans, you can't control the color or the placements of the lights, and usually what happens is all this makes up for terrible photographs. And when you add a flash in, which is lighting that the photographer can control, sometimes that is the only difference between whether the image turns out great or not. So what about videographers then? They need light too, right? Well, for photographers, flashes produce a lot of power from a relatively small unit. But for videographers who use video lights, these tend to scale pretty dramatically with the amount of power you need. Back then, when LED lights were not mainstream, if you needed something with a decent amount of power, it usually weighs a ton and comes with a fire risk hazard. I'm talking about halogen lights, by the way. And thankfully, once LED lights took over, we're now seeing manufacturers push out models that can range from hundreds of watts to thousands of watts. But these are all units that are still relatively big. So what if you need something that is more compact? Well, there's innovation on that side of the equation as well. We have a lot of models in the market now that can fit in the palm of your hand, but still produce a lot of light. And I have one of those lights right here. This is the Sidande Matrix 40 watt light. Now excuse the pronunciation here because I really don't know how to pronounce Sidande in English. But the Chinese term, if I remember correctly, is called Sidande. So yeah, let's continue. Okay, so from the name itself, I guess it's obvious that this light produces 40 watts of light. And frankly, for something that fits in the palm of my hand, it's an astounding amount of power because just 1-2 years back, something that is this size can only produce about 10 watts at most. And now we have something that has 4 times the amount of power. And not only that, this is a bicolor light, which means that it can produce a light range that goes from cold to warm, making this very versatile for all sorts of environments. Now the one I'm holding in my hand here is bicolor only. But if you spend a little bit more money, you can get one that has RGB built in as well. But since you see from behind me, I already have lights that produce RGB colors. That's why I opted to just get the bicolor model for this instead. Okay, so in the box, you get the light, a magnetic diffuser, and this is pretty interesting. This is a hot shoe mount that uses DJI's quick release system. So if you own DJI cameras, you probably have a few of these mounts already. And to demonstrate, I have one here that is for my Osmo 360 camera, and here we go. fits just fine. What this means is, compared to other lights that only come with a 1/4 inch screw hole, you can attach this light very quickly in situations where you need it and remove it just as fast if you don't. There's also an extended kit that gives you a grid and barn doors if you need that kind of control, but I don't, so I didn't purchase the kit. Now when it comes to controls, it's pretty straightforward because you have just one menu button and 2 dials. To turn on the light, you hold the menu button for about 4 seconds, and then when the screen turns on, you rotate the upper dial to get past the safety lock feature. Now that the light is on, you can use the upper dial to control the temperature of the light and also the lower dial to control the intensity of the light. If you press the upper dial, you can go through preset temperature levels and also the bottom dial to go through preset intensity levels, as you can see here. Now if you click the menu button once, you go into the effects mode, where you can use various effects and also adjust the intensity of them using the bottom dial. Click the menu button twice to change the orientation of the screen, which is useful if you plan to have this light upside down, for example. There's also an app that you can download to have wireless control over this light, including the built-in effects. By the way, you probably noticed that the interface is in Chinese, and because this, for now, is only a China unit, it's not possible to change the language to English. This might change when they start selling this in more countries and they release a new firmware update to address this, but I'm just speculating at this point. Alright, so how good is the light in use? Well, for starters, it is bright, and in fact, it's so bright to the point where 1% can be really harsh to look at in the eye sometimes. And the surface of the light is frosted, so it does a good job of blending together all of the LEDs to give you a pretty uniform beam. And if you need a wider spread of light, you can use this magnetic diffuser, which just attaches on like that. But keep in mind that diffusers like this only function to spread the beam so that it covers a bigger area. It doesn't actually make the light softer because all it does is just diffuse the light. It doesn't make the size of the light bigger. So if the size of the light is still the same, your shadows don't change. They are still harsh regardless. Another point about this particular diffuser is that it's pretty opaque. You can't really see through it. So that means that this cuts down a lot of the light's power. And at the same time, it also noticeably changes the temperature of the lights. So if you need something with a lot of output, don't use this thing. Now, touching on battery life, it has a pretty big battery inside. In fact, about 60% of the internal volume of this light is taken up just by the battery alone. And if you run this at full tilt, the manufacturer claims that you can run this for about 40 minutes. But realistically, I would expect about 30-ish minutes with this thing running at full power. Obviously, it can go for longer if you use lower power levels. Now I'm going to talk about the drawbacks. While I appreciate that it has a safety lock function that prevents this thing from turning on in your bag and burning a hole through it, it is one of the biggest downsides to me because to hold this thing for 4 seconds and then turn this dial means that I'm dealing with 2 control points, which can be a bit fiddly. And this is contrasting to if they were to use a recessed power switch, which I can turn on in half a second. Now for the next drawback, this thing comes with a fan. Now, given that this is a 40-watt light, a fan is pretty much mandatory when it comes to running this thing for any extended period of time. The problem here is, one, the fan is really loud. It makes a high-pitched buzz that if you have this thing several meters away, you can still hear it. And frankly speaking, a loud fan by itself isn't really a big problem because these days you have noise reduction that is built into your editor software that you can use to take this away. But the second issue, or the second factor here, is this fan turns on and off by itself, and I have no way to control whether this happens or not. And this is really frustrating to me because I can't use this in situations like interviews where I need the ambient sound to be constant. Imagine if this thing turns on in the middle of an interview, you will definitely hear it. And the problem is when this fan turns on, even with noise reduction on, for example, it will change how the video sounds to the point where it can be distracting. But with that being said, if you're using this to record in environments where the ambient sound is already pretty noisy to begin with, like events or videos where you're using this without recording sound, then I think the fan noise is probably not going to bother you much at all. I just think that for all the effort put into designing such a nice looking light, Sidande could have spent a little bit more effort in sourcing a quieter fan at least. Now, I haven't mentioned pricing so far because it's not exactly easy to purchase this light at the moment, unless you go through channels like AliExpress, or if you can read Chinese, apps like Taobao or Pinduoduo. But essentially, this light is very affordable. I got mine for less than $30 equivalent. And if you have seen the prices for 40-watt lights from other brands, you will know that this is a huge difference compared to the rest. And not only that, in terms of size, this is still one of the smallest ones that has 40 watts. Essentially, the price and the size alone probably makes it affordable enough that you can disregard all of the drawbacks that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so that wraps up my review of this small but highly capable piece of equipment. If you need any other information about this, let me know in the comments and I'll get back to you when I can. Till then, let's talk again in the next video.